And the countdown is over, and we are live Friday late morning, uh, where I am anyway, maybe not where you are. So we'll just wait for some people to get on board and hopefully join in the conversation because let's get nuts. We're going to go nuts. And I'm going to point out some flaws in calorie counting and if it fits your macros and macro proportioning and all the rest of it. I'm going to get into that. Um, some house cleaning things first that I want to get into, some things that have come to my attention that drive me nuts and all the rest. Let me know you're out there, by the way. I keep forgetting to say that. And hit your share buttons. Let's get some people on board and let's get some people participating. People seem to really like last week's webinar with a lot of audience participation. Try to do that as much as we can, but I'll wait for you guys to all get on board. So, a few things. One, I'm just going to hold up this book, The Low Carb Fraud by T. Colin Campbell. It's a very, very tiny, thin book. You could read it in a couple hours. Something people should read. I'll reference it a couple times today for sure. And I just want to bring that to everyone's attention. Hopefully, everyone can hear and see me okay. So, I bring that to your attention. And also, I want to just go over a few things regarding that. Um, So, okay, hopefully people are going to see me in a minute. No, okay. Hopefully, everyone's got me back on board and you can hear me and see me. But yeah, I forgot to post the video. Enough of looking at my face anyway. So hopefully everyone's on board. The video should be playing right now. So let me know. I'll just hold on a second there. So Yeah, apparently, if you're following any vegan people like myself, then you're just a mindless drone and you don't know what you're doing. Even though I create, research after research, post after post, and these guys have 10 times my following, and they never offer any research other than to name call and take a high opinion of their own opinion. It just boggles my mind. So apparently, people like T. Colin Campbell, with 50 plus years of academic peer reviewed research and publishing over 250 papers, apparently none of them know what they're talking about or what they're doing. And all you have to do is be a meat eater and love being a meat eater, and you should just ignore the evidence. So, whatever. And then, where's my apology for being right about metabolic damage all along? So these are the things that boggle my mind. But today, like I said, let's get nuts. Let's get into it. Hopefully, you guys can all see me and know I'm back. My apologies for disconnecting, folks. That was my fault. But I want to get into limitations, all right, and diminishments of calorie tracking, calorie counting, if it fits your macros, macro biases, and all the rest of it, but from a different angle. We're going to look at something very specific to outline the limitations when it comes to people who are slaves to their Fitbit and all the rest of this nonsense that is really just about making a profit and selling it. So hopefully everyone's out there. Let me know you're out there. Hit your emoticons and hit your share buttons. Let's get going because my viewership shows very, very low, and it can't be that low. So hopefully everyone's here. But let's get nuts. We're going to get going here, and hopefully you all didn't miss my preamble, my preamble rant, and I'm going to get going there. So, yeah, I'm going to bring into the broadcast my lecture as usual. We're going to let's get nuts, and hopefully you guys can see this. And I got a lot to get through, and hopefully you'll find it interesting. And we're going to look at the limitations. In the past, I've already discussed why, if it fits your macros and calorie tracking apps, may not be the smartest idea for people for many, many reasons. And here you can see one of the links to my YouTube lectures on that. So you could easily just copy and paste this if you want. I'll copy and paste it into the notes for you right here. And I'll just show that on the screen just briefly. So you can copy if you haven't heard that lecture before. Maybe you want to give that a listen to at another time. And you can see a lot of the limitations from the research there on calorie tracking apps and the like. So that's something important you want to look at. But let's continue today and look at some other research that equally reflects on the extreme limitations of macros and calorie counting. Quantity matters over quality matters, and the outside in fitness industry dogma versus inside out health, well-being, and leanness. So I'll start directly with a boom on that, and we're going to get into it by getting nuts and looking at some research on actually nuts. So let's get nuts by talking about nuts and pointing out the limitations of calorie control, macros, etc. Gabriel's just saying calories on labels are really just rough ideas, estimates. They're allowed to be off by a certain percentage. And even if they're on, there's all kinds of differences within qualitative analysis of glycemic index and things like that, that depending on where a fruit was harvested in the orchard can increase, decrease glycemic load, glycemic index, calorie proportions, et cetera, et cetera. I'm not going to get into that in this one because I'm going to use nuts as my example. But let's sort of do a pre-checklist, and then I'll run through all this and show you how and why macro tracking, calorie tracking is having you miss the mark over and over again to things that really, really matter. So about nuts, we're going to talk nuts and weight control. We're going to talk nuts and metabolism. We're going to talk nuts and fat burning. We're going to talk nuts and longevity. We're going to talk nuts and health, nuts and disease prevention. And as you can see and above, you can't number crunch a lot of that stuff. And you only think you can, and you're missing out when you try to do so. So that's an important thing. So nuts and weight control, let's start with the thing that everyone is usually, the most concerned with and the most, obsessed about. It's always about losing weight, keeping weight off. And yes, when it comes to weight control, nuts are very calorie dense. That's why so many people avoid them. But does the caloric density of nuts translate into weight gain and fatness? Well, not necessarily. In regards to overall caloric density of nuts, in almost 24 clinical trials regarding nuts and body weight, not a single study showed that regular consumption of nuts led to the weight gain you would otherwise expect. Meaning, if you just counted calories and did calculations on your phone or your app, then you might not get what the math leads you to. And the study showed less weight gain than predicted, no weight gain at all, or even some weight loss. And in one of the studies I'm going to show you, this was after research subjects simply added a handful or two of nuts to their daily diet without compensating for those increased calories. So, like many studies, if you eat more than you usually do, you will gain weight. Okay, that doesn't, you don't really need a calculator to track that. So, that's an important thing. So, I'm going to start with this research, this piece of research from Asia Pacific Journal of Clinical Nutrition 2007. Now, what's important here is the date, because I've said in several of my previous webinars that a lot of the research that had me and other people breaking vegan and going vegan was because the research, even if it was always there, it wasn't organized and articulated in a formatted and formulated way where you could just really, really make sequences out of the research. So this was before that time, 2007, and about nuts. Here in the middle, what we see, I'm going to read it to you. The findings show that the role of nut consumption in body weight management is varied. Nuts, when included as part of energy-controlled diet, were found in some instances to assist with weight loss. However, when nuts are just added to an existing diet without controlling for energy intake, body weight increased. And here's the important, although to a lesser extent than theoretically predicted. In other words, if you were using outside in math, these people should have gained more weight than they actually gained. So there might be something about nuts in there. And then it goes on to the limited evidence in 2007. I'm going to show you how that got better and better. And then finally, this review shows there is a lack of evidence to support the restriction of nut consumption in weight management, indicating that further research is needed. And I'm going to show you some of that research, but a lack of research for restricting nuts in any kind of diet. So that's really, really important there. So then we get to Nutritional Journal of 2012. So as we can see, we're now 5-6 years later. This is what I'm talking about, the organization of the research. Effects of pistachios on body weight in Chinese subjects with metabolic syndrome. Now, the reason this is important, metabolic syndrome almost always indicates that these are people already overweight with certain parameters of ill health that make it even harder to lose weight. So what do we see here in the conclusion? Despite concerns that pistachio nut consumption may promote weight gain, so people are already paranoid about the caloric density, the daily ingestion of either 42 or 70 grams of pistachios for 12 weeks did not lead to weight gain or an increase in waist to hip ratio in Chinese subjects who already have metabolic syndrome. In addition, pistachio consumption may improve the risk factors associated with metabolic syndrome. So not only do people who are already weight challenged not gain weight by eating nuts, in this case pistachio, but by eating those nuts, something that you can't measure, also improves the risk factors associated with having that condition to begin with. So this is very, very important stuff that shows you can't calorie track these kind of effects and the metabolic biochemical hormonal responses that take place in the body after primary ingestion of specific substances. Now, this particular research from here, Nutrition, Metabolic, Cardiovascular Disease, 2011, nut consumption, weight gain, and obesity. And then you see there from the epidemiological evidence, I'm going to just read you the conclusion here. Consumption of nuts was not associated with a higher risk of weight gain in long-term epidemiologic studies and clinical trials. The key word here, long-term, boom. So we just had a short-term one about pistachios, and now we have a long-term evidence, which is very, very important as far as I'm concerned in terms of metabolic optimization, weight control long term rather than being a short term emphasis that we see online over and over and over again. So that's very, very important. So hopefully you're with me up till now. Let me know you're out there. Hit your share buttons and your emoticons, because my indicator shows there's very few participants right now. So hopefully you guys get on board. So now this one from the Journal of American College of Nutrition, 2009, the effect of a calorie-controlled diet containing walnuts on substrate oxidation during 8 hours in a room calorimeter. Now, I love these kind of studies. They basically put people in rooms that are completely controlled equally. How many calories they're taking in, temperature in the room, blah, 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 all of these things. And this is how they do studies on metabolism, et cetera, et cetera. So what we want here, I'm going to read the results section and the conclusion section again to point out the limitations of macro tracking, et cetera, et cetera. So as we see in the results section, during the 8-hour measurement period, no difference in energy expenditure was noted between the diets, because the diets, right, they put the two groups, you can read over the methods, two groups, they both took in the same amount of calories, same amount of energy expenditure, but a significant difference in respiratory quotient was observed between the diets, significant. Carbohydrate oxidation was lower and fat oxidation was higher during the walnut period than during the control period. Now, let me translate academic speak for you what this means. The conclusion is a calorie-controlled diet of core foods, including walnuts, may be advantageous in promoting the use of body fat stores, at least under acute conditions. So in other words, under equal calorie intake conditions, as you would see if you're tracking macros or counting calories, something different is happening depending on the food choices you make. In this case, choosing walnuts led to greater use of stored fat, even though walnuts are a fat source in and of themselves. You can't measure that. Boom, shakalaka, laka, boom, boom. This is important because nuts specifically, in this case, walnuts, show more fat burning metabolism than the control group. I call this metabolic optimization, the qualitative difference between specific foods, those that are fat storing and partitioning toward fat storing versus the ones that utilize fat and by taking in specific foods like the walnuts actually contribute to greater fat oxidation and mobilization of fatty acids for use. So that's all really important stuff. I love these kind of studies, not as much as meta-analysis and cross-cultural studies, but I still love these kind of studies. So don't get confused with the academia of it. Understand what it's really saying, and what it's really saying is all things being controlled and accounted for like you would do with outside-in tracking on your Fitbit, et cetera, et cetera. If everything else was the same and you had walnuts instead of animal protein in there, then you're going to get more stored body fat use than you would if you were eating egg whites, chicken breasts, whatever. So that's a really, really important point. Again, this shows the limitations of counting calories and macro tracking. So what we're going to make of this thus far, what we see here is in an equally calorie controlled environment, nuts increase fat burning metabolism substantially, as the research showed. So much for if it fits your macros and calorie counting machinery and all the rest, even though people who are completely uninformed still want to argue with me on social media about these things that are proven time and again in the research that quality matters over quantity. So what you can measure isn't always what you can observe and what actually matters. So the overall conclusion right now, I'm gonna get to some things, Rick. The overall conclusion right now is that a conclusion that diminishes calorie counting and outside-in math formulas to determine weight control, and especially in terms of optimizing metabolism. You can't do that through crunching numbers. This also blows up if it fits your macros. The biochemistry and hormonal pathways of the body are not easily quantified by outside-in logic and rationalities. And my famous Einstein quote, "Not everything that counts can be counted." And Rick is just saying, I'll just put that on there, What about the higher thermic effect of protein? Doesn't have a higher effect. Not as much as you would think, and not as substantial as what we're going to see by eliminating animal protein and going to low protein diets and then switching from there, and the effect that that has on thermogenic response. And I'm going to get to that. So you're just a bit ahead of me, Rick, which is great. I mean, that means you follow the logic as it exists. So that's really, really important stuff. So again, you're on there, hit your share buttons and hit your emoticons. So I know you're out there because of that goof up at the beginning, which was entirely my fault, by the way. So sorry about that. So that's what we make of the research thus far and the takeaways thus far, but it's about to get really, really interesting. So we can see from a purely caloriometric viewpoint, nuts, even though they're more calorie and energy dense than other foods of equal weight, translation, nuts are high in calories. But because of specific biochemical processes and the metabolic dietary compensation systems, regular nut consumption can make you leaner, help you control your weight, stay healthier, and live longer. And I'm about to get to that element of the living longer and the health benefits. The increased fat burning metabolism effects of regular nut consumption can go a long way to optimize metabolism in cosmetically friendly ways. So, in other words, you want to look better. Don't be so worried about, oh, I got to eat cucumbers and celery sticks and carrot sticks, and I can't eat peanut butter because all the calories in it. Well, that's only partially true. And if you get stuck in inside out math or outside in calorie counting, then you're in real trouble. So I'm going to quote from the book, Low Carb Fraud, the one I held up earlier. Here it is. I'm going to quote from that book. Now, here we go. This is T. Colin Campbell. A low protein diet, such as whole food plant based diet, but look at the first four words, a low protein diet, increases the proportion of dietary calories expended either as body heat, that's addressing your point there, Rick, or through voluntary physical activity, thus sparing the storage of this energy as body fat. So, in other words, you're less likely to store fat the lower your protein is. Our low protein environmental animals consume more oxygen and form more of a highly specialized tissue, what we call brown adipose tissue, which diverts calories and energy away from the making of body fat. Instead, use it to produce body heat, a process sometimes called metabolic thermogenesis. And one of my major themes of my cycle diet approach of underfeeds with overfeeds as well. So as you see here, so sparing the storage of energy as body fat comes from a low protein, high carb diet, and then utilizing more body fat in that process. The walnut, and pistachio studies were just examples of what T. Colin Campbell is talking about here. So back to my own points here. In short, both processes resulting from a low protein diet, increased thermogenesis and increased physical activity, being, exercising regularly, divert calories away from the making of body fat. In these and other studies, the difference critical to body weight loss or gain is the way that calories are used by the body, not the amount consumed. And boom, shakalaka laka, boom, boom. That's a quote from T. Colin Campbell. In other words, if you think you're merely calorie counting and calorie equating and all this, eat less on off days from training, you're missing the boat, you're missing the point, you're missing the relevance, you're missing the science, you're missing the wisdom of the body. I'm going to expand on this in the next point. So as we see here, again, the key difference critical to body weight loss or gain is the way that calories are used by the body, not the amount of calories consumed. Boom. And that goes to your point as well, Rick, about thermogenesis. What we see is lowering protein actually increases not just thermogenesis, but the willingness of the body to surrender body fat stores, which is very important. Now, my point is in black. T. Colin Campbell's is in red that I got from Andy. Andy's Instagram post from the other day. If you're not following Andy, why aren't you following Andy? Get on board. He's not just another pretty face. So in terms of the previous point, the key difference critical to body weight loss or gain is the way calories are used by the body, not the amount consumed. The key point of relevance here is that it's not so much calories burned during exercise that matter. So forget programming and all that crap on your elliptical. What T. Colin Campbell is explaining, it's the combination of diet and certain types and qualities of food and exercise, and how the two together influence key biochemical and hormonal functions beyond what can be calibrated, counted, or measured. So if you're worrying, well, my routine isn't metabolic enough. I actually had a client write me the other day. A personal trainer walked up to him in the gym and said, you shouldn't be just sitting there between sets. You should be doing uh, push-ups or sit-ups or planks or something. It's like, no, the whole idea there was it's about how many calories you're burning while you're in the gym. We see that mentality in boot camp classes and stuff. They're all jumping around and bopping around. Let's go back to T. Colin Campbell's point. The key difference critical to body weight loss or gain is the way calories are used by the body, not the amount consumed or the amount burnt. Quit majoring in minor points. So the key relevance here is not about calories burned, and it's about understanding qualitative elements of hormonal biochemical responses to stimuli, whether that stimuli is ingested food and or exercise. So back to T. Colin Campbell in red, don't want to take credit for quotes that aren't mine. The good news, you can eat when you're hungry and eat until you're full. Let us repeat that in a different way. There's no portion control, calorie counting, or carb counting in the low protein, high carb approach to dieting because of elements like thermogenesis, nutrient partitioning, etc. That explodes, boom, explosion, gone, bang, boom, out of here with if it fits your macros and all the rest of the nonsense. And what about my protein and this and that? Why not simplify? Why not understand and respect not just the wisdom of the body, but the genius and the brilliance that goes along with that? And why shouldn't diet strategy be fun? And why shouldn't you be able to eat till satiation? So very, very important stuff. Perry, if you can go back to my first slide, I don't know if you can. I did a link to one of my lectures on the limitations of if it fits your macros, etc. So you might want to check that out as well. Now, this study from Lancet, I'm going to show you the key points in it because I realize you can't read that. But look at all the authors here. There's a gazillion of them. A comparative risk assessment of burden of disease and injury attributable to 67 different risk factors in clusters in 21 regions from 1990 to 2010, a systematic analysis for the global burden of disease study in 2010. How was that relevant? Nuts, longevity, and health. In this 2010 study that appeared in the respected journal Lancet, the researchers speculated that not eating enough nuts and seeds leads to actual death of millions of people per year and is the third leading dietary cause of death. Imagine that, not eating enough seeds and nuts, which people are also limiting, okay, because they're on a fat burning, fat limiting diet, okay? So they're not eating enough nuts, and yet the third leading cause of dietary related deaths. So much so that these researchers, and remember how many of them there were, take another look at this slide. This is all the researchers involved here, as you would expect over a study that spans 20 years. So much so they speculate death from not eating enough nuts and seeds leads to 15 times more deaths than from all people who die from overdoses of heroin, crack cocaine, and other illicit drugs combined. So very, very important. In terms of longevity, people who eat nuts tend to live longer and experience less deaths from cancers, heart disease, respiratory disease, and you can't measure that. Boom. So very, very important, as always, that we see the health benefits of going plant-based versus animal-based. You are not going to, okay, let's look at this. In terms of longevity, people who eat nuts tend to live longer and experience less deaths from cancer, heart disease, or respiratory disease. We might as well say than from people who eat a lot of animal products, because there is no counter research that represents the opposite. So very, very important. And then from the New England Journal of Medicine, 2013. Remember, I started with a piece of research from 2007 and told you how I would show you how the research has expounded since then in all the right areas. So, conclusion here, the two large independent cohort studies involving nurses and other health professionals demonstrated nut consumption was inversely associated in a dose dependent manner with total cause specific mortality. This relationship independent of other predictors of death. That's there in the conclusion for you. Why is that important? What does it mean in non-academic terms? It means that this study controlled for other usual predictors of death, and what is left over, they could find that the more nuts you ate and the more frequently you ate them, then the healthier you would be. Very, very important stuff. So that's something you want to look at as well. So what I was referring to, Perry, was my own podcast about the limitations of if it fits your macros and Fitbit tracks and whatever. It's in the very first or second slide, anyway, if you can find that. And then this one from the Journal of American Medical Association, Internal Medicine, 2015. Conclusion and relevance down here at the bottom. Nut consumption was associated with decreased overall and cardiovascular disease mortality across different ethnic groups and among individuals from low socioeconomic status groups. Consumption of nuts, particularly peanuts, given their general affordability, may be considered a cost-effective measure to improve cardiovascular health. People keep trying to make this insane argument that it's expensive to be vegan or to eat plant-based, but it's actually cheap. So what you hear, conclusion and health on a budget, then nuts are a lot better than beige fast food, which is what typical people of low socioeconomic status tend to eat a lot more fast food because it's cheaper, and they tend to be the ones with the most problems with overweight and obesity and related problems of type 2 diabetes, etc. So we see a trend here that isn't something that can just be extinguished through calorie counting apps and macro tracking, etc. So this study from Nutrition 2014, nut consumption and 5-year all-cause mortality in a Mediterranean cohort. So now different side of the world, different type of research, and what we see here, nut consumption significantly, down here at the bottom, significantly associated with a reduced risk for all-cause mortality after the first 5-year follow-up in the SUN project. So again, long-term, then the more nuts you eat, the healthier you tend to be and the less likely you are to die of various causes. So we see you really are what you eat, and you really are as healthy as the food you put in your mouth. So again, this study right here, what I want to get across in the conclusion section here, increased frequency of nut consumption was associated with a significantly reduced risk of mortality in a Mediterranean population already at high cardiovascular risk. So in other words, people who are already at a high risk, the more nuts they ate, the key word here, frequency, associated with a significantly reduced risk of dying, even though they're already in a high risk group. That says a lot in terms of things that you can't measure, things that you can't count, the things that will keep you healthy in terms of preventative medication, if you will. And then gender specific effects. Regular consumption of nuts is associated with a lower risk of cardiovascular disease in women with type 2 diabetes. So what we see here from the Journal of Nutrition 2009, gender specific health benefits. The last couple of lines, these data suggest frequent nut and peanut butter consumption is associated with a significantly lower cardiovascular disease risk in women who already have type 2 diabetes. And if you're not familiar with this, if you have type 2 diabetes, the reason that's a concern is it's because a gateway to other higher risk things like cancers, cardiovascular disease, heart attacks, strokes, et cetera, et cetera. So they're taking women who are already at risk, and what we see is that frequent nut and peanut butter consumption significantly lowers their cardiovascular disease risk, even though they're already compromised. That is undeniably huge. And again, it goes well beyond tracking calories and macros. And we need to get that across. We need to get back to the T. Colin Campbell point that you can eat ad libitum on a plant-based diet as much as you want, get back in contact and get back in connection with your hunger and satiety feedback loop, and you'll be able to eat more and more and weigh less and less. So, and then from this one, I've already posted in a previous webinar for the men because I did gender specific. That was women. This one for men, pistachio diet improves erectile function parameters and serum lipid profiles in patients with erectile dysfunction. So pistachio diet, putting these people, and this is from the International Journal of Impedance Research, so it's not biased. It's not by some pistachio company. And as we can see here, actually served as an ED treatment for men, much like Cialis or Viagra. So very, very important stuff just from eating nuts. And again, you eat. And then one of the reasons I wanted to include this from Nutritional Research and Practice 2014, communicating clinical research to reduce cancer risk through diet, walnuts as a case example. And I'm just going to draw out the points for you because that one is a little hard to see as well. A review of the scientific literature concluded that, quote, the far-reaching positive effects of a plant-based diet that includes walnuts may be the most critical message for the public. Boom. Eating nuts within an overall plant-based diet has, quote, far-reaching positive effects, which takes us back to the T. Colin Campbell quote. But there's more to that because it's also about if you eat more and more of this stuff, meaning nuts and plants, you're eating less and less of that stuff, meaning animal sources of protein and fat. So in summary, this isn't my summary. This is the summary that is from here. All right. So their summary is dietary recommendations for reducing cancer risk are largely consistent around the world. Something else I've had to argue with idiots about on my YouTube channel and stuff who want to take one isolated study that's ancient and has been completely debunked and then argue for meat-based diet. I mean, it's just insane, makes my head explode. But continuing with this quote, a plant-based diet is associated with decreased risk for cancer and other chronic diseases due in part to reduced chronic inflammation. So again, reducing cancer risk largely consistent around the world in research, due in part to reduce chronic inflammation. The reason that's important, or at least ironic and funny to me, is I just posted on YouTube 2 days ago about a study from 1999 that had all about going very low protein and keeping your proteins to vegan plant-based proteins. And then someone who wanted to attack me was all about everyone knows all that sugar causes inflammation. Well, here you go in the research that in agreement across the world, right, for reducing risk, you go plant-based diet to reduce chronic inflammation. Sugar causes inflammation. Everybody knows that. You're doing a disservice to people. Well, I'm not telling people to go out and eat friggin' Frosted Flakes 5 times a day. There's a difference between sugar and carbohydrates. But this is what you get this day in modern social media. Opinionated people who aren't have any references to back them up. Nuts and walnuts in particular have been associated with a reduced risk for cancer as well as reduced risk for cardiovascular disease, diabetes, obesity, and inflammation markers. I mean, boom. How much more of this do we need to point out? I'm going to highlight, I'm going to bold that. Nuts and walnuts in particular are associated with reduced risk for cancer as well as cardiovascular disease, diabetes, obesity, and inflammation markers. So it's not that sugar causes inflammation, it's that meat and other elements and dairy cause inflammation. I'll get to that in another video, but I just wish people who don't have the background and don't have the references stop being the ones who make the most comments. Social media really is controlled by idiots. I mean, we got the buffoon in chief as a good example of that south of our border. But anyway, walnuts are an example of a food that can be incorporated into nutrition messaging for health benefits, as well as in support of meeting broad recommendations for cancer risk. these things can't be counted by counting calories. So if you want to take the equivalent amount of calories from a chicken breast or an egg white and compare them to walnuts or nuts, then you're going to come up short from all the benefits that you could otherwise have by trying to apply outside in logic to something that has inside out parameters that can't be measured. So, and just as an example, and right in line with Louise asking me how much and how often do I eat nuts, very good one. That's very timely there, Louise. So here is my lunch from today. Uh, as you can see, walnuts in front there, 40 grams. And then with that, I bought the family picnic size fruit already cut up. So grapes, banana, cherries, cantaloupe, honeydew, pineapple, 6 fruits. Boom. I got my cherries on the right there. Um, two containments of the cantaloupe, one of pineapple, grapes in the middle, honeydew melon on the left, the biggest bananas I can find. When you go plant-based, now I've posted pictures like this before. People, oh, I would be so bloated if I ate that. Oh, I would be so distended. Actually, no, you wouldn't be if other component parts of your other meals and diets didn't have animal protein in them. When you eliminate that and eat this, stomach gets flatter. And as T. Colin Campbell said, there's no need to worry about size and portion control and all the rest. So the other thing about this that I made a little note for myself down here is this took me over 20 minutes to eat as well. And this benefit often remains understated when you go plant-based. The longer it takes you to consume a meal, which it does with plant-based, whole food, plant-based diet, then the more likely you are to connect in a natural way with your hunger satiety feedback loop and stop eating before you've eaten too much. Now, for a lot of people, that looks like too much, but this is the benefit of a plant-based diet. You eat till you're satiated, and once you go plant-based, I'm hearing this over and over, not just from myself and Andy and clients, but people that write me, which I'm going to cover in another webinar. But it doesn't take long before metabolic adaptation takes place and you're just increasing your portions of everything. Like it just, every meal gets bigger. And this is an example of that for me. So, I'm not even training right now. And then this is my lunch. And that's a big ass lunch. But a lot of people look at that and go, oh, I can't eat that much. And again, Perry, if you want to find my podcast on the truth about fruit, where I debunked all that nonsense about that's too much sugar, again, for that person who commented on my video from YouTube the other day, everyone knows sugar increases inflammation. This isn't sugar. This is nature's sugar. There's a whole big difference to that. Anyway, so walnuts in front, and that's my meal too. Louise, I used to eat nuts twice a day. Now, because I have flax seeds and chia seeds or hemp seeds with my breakfast, I eat nuts and seeds for the first 2 meals. And my third meal, I've taken out the nuts because I needed to increase my calories from carbohydrates and lower my fat because I wanted to. And so now on that meal, I have rice with peas and corn. So replacing that, but I still have in my first 2 meals of the day, nuts and seeds. So let's get nuts. Regular nut consumption can improve your health, prevent disease and fight disease, control your weight, control your hunger, burn fat more efficiently, optimize your metabolism, treat specific disorders, and none of these things can be accurately counted or accounted for in tracking macros or counting calories, no matter how sophisticated that math tends to appear to be. Just because it's on an app with fancy friggin', hieroglyphics and the rest of it, doesn't mean it's adding value, and people need to get away from that and get in connection with your body. The body will always be more complicated and wise than outside in complicated formulas that try to direct it. Let's read that a few more times. Sometimes I dazzle myself with how well I write. The body will always be complicated, more complicated and wiser than the outside in complicated formulas that try to direct the body. Everyone that I know who struggles with weight is usually on a fitness app and they think that's the solution. Stop the honeymooning and get into the real life marriage with your body. and forget about the honeymoons on this diet and that diet. Boom, shakalaka laka, boom, boom. And that is, they say, is that. And Perry's just posted, there you go, right there, The Truth About Fruit from my YouTube channel. You can watch that webinar if you want. Again, citing research over and over again, because that's just what I do. And you can call it bias if you want, but whatever. JP's just saying, if loving fruit is wrong, then I don't want to be right. And that's from someone who's lost a ton of weight and got buff, kept the weight off, and serves as a role model to other people. And very, very important. And Perry's just posting more of that there. So again, I'm going to post the original Let's Get Nuts. And I do have another thing I want to talk about, and it's just so you can see this, and I'll just hide the Let's Get Nuts. But I think this thing here is really, really important, so I wanted to bring it up. This came up on the news yesterday. So politics, power, and threat. I've talked about low carb lies on the Politics for Profit before, but the signs of change are upon us. A news story that came across me the other day. I watched the headline news channel while I'm eating my breakfast every day. And sure enough, the powers that be have decided to enforce that nut milks can no longer call themselves milk. And they want this reinforced so that almond milk, cashew milk, on all these other milks that you see here, just as some examples, are going to have to change what they label their product as, because the dairy industry is now so threatened that they had this friggin', again, politics of power. What gets written into law becomes ridiculous. So they had this definition of what classifies as milk, in terms of what you can sell consumers, and it has to be from a healthy lactating cow, which healthy is a questionable term if you've watched Cowspiracy or What the Health, or read T. Colin Campbell's book about the health of these cows, whatever. But this is how threatened the dairy industry is, because that definition was on the books for a long time, and now they're demanding that it be enforced, and that these nut milks change their name and no longer call their product milk. And this is going to start being reinforced. And I don't think you're going to slow down the train, folks. This is just the sign of the change that I said, that people like Andy and myself were out in front of this wave that's coming, but this wave is coming. And wouldn't be the first time I was ahead of the trends as they are, and people want to buck what is a necessity. So I found that story both disappointing, at the same time very, very important. And then Perry is just posting this. The USDA announces safety net assistance, milk producers. Yeah, you maybe want to check that out as well. So the times, they really are changing, folks, and it's becoming more and more evident to be more plant-based. So as I said at the beginning, in terms of before I started, I was waiting everyone to get on board, and before I accidentally disconnected everybody before I started, and I started with this right here, which I'll just let me just take this down. So Low Carb Fraud by T. Colin Campbell. It's a book you can read in an hour or two, when it's well referenced as well, and shows some of the other low carb lies in the Politics of Profit. So this carnivore meat eater dude who's saying that all of us are just imbeciles if we're vegans, and then we just blindly follow biased research. And that includes someone like T. Colin Campbell, who has 50 plus years of research and has published over 250 academically peer-reviewed research and published books. And this guy, this meat-eating idiot, never backs up anything he says with any research at all. He just tells everyone to go and hunt vegans in terms of social media, or completely ignore them, rather than consider the argument on its merits. I find that completely offensive. And again, that means that I'm one of these blind idiots as well, even though I've got an undergraduate and graduate education that, afforded me to take a course in epidemiology and methodology that showed me and taught me at a master's degree level how to break down looking at studies and references. And I'm able to do that, and still, because of that, was able to go vegan. So I'm not blindly following anybody. And those things, those kind of idiotic comments. I can't believe that that guy has like 10 times the support that I have, when they offer no evidence at all other than tell people what they want to hear, and you'll gather a following, rather than looking at the objective truth. And I want to get to correlation versus causation, but I'll do that another time, because my time's up. And hopefully I will, yeah, Lydia knows who I'm talking about. I don't really like to give him, I don't really like to name him Lydia, because people go check him out, and that increases his numbers, which will give him more traction online. That's what I wish people would do for me. That's why I keep saying, please share and please hit your likes and stuff, because just by going and listening to this idiot will increase his algorithms on Google and things that track this, and will send him out to more viewers and more people automatically. And then he'll get more viewers because we mention his name. So I didn't really, that's why I don't like mentioning the names of people I consider to be morons and idiots, because they don't deserve the traction they already have, and the attention they get, and the misinformation that they spew. Not to mention, I mean, just the, I don't know, just the personal attacks and stuff. He's just a very distasteful human being. I don't know how he ever had a medical license, given his level of complete and utter ignorance is mind-boggling to me. But yeah, so Monica's saying, just don't stop. We can stay and listen more. Well, there's very few of you doing that, Monica, or I would stay, but you guys can always bring your comments and questions. I do want to talk about, in maybe the next week, correlation is not causation, which I hear from the omnivores and the meat eaters that they think is just such a brilliant comment. Ooh, correlation isn't causation. There's this, what an academic sentence I just used. You pat myself on the back. And I'll talk about why that's nonsense in maybe the next video. As you can see, I get a little bit passionate about this stuff, because social media is where misinformation and fake news spreads. And it's usually the people who are telling the truth who are accused of spreading fake news, and we know where and how that all initiated. So Mark's just saying, really good show, Scott. Love hearing about all these good things that Whole Foods has to offer us. And what I wanted to do, Mark, is I wanted to take something about plant-based, and I wanted to show also an angle on how calorie tracking and macro accounting doesn't reveal all these other things that are so important for weight control, long-term health and well-being, and even living longer. It's very, very important that people start thinking in different ways. And I think what bothers me the most is there's a number of people who are struggling with weight who won't listen to that. They still think the magic is in crunching numbers and things like that. And, tell people to take their protein down as low as they can and don't even worry about it. That's just, I might as well be speaking alien, I might as well be speaking Mars. So, and Perry's just saying, subscribe to the podcast at smartersculptedphysique.com, or even better, sign up to my email list at scottabelefitness.com, because come September, I'm going to be doing a hell of a lot less social media posts and a lot more writing to my email list and trying to grow that at scottabelefitness.com. But, again, folks, Lydia got me to bring up a very, very important point. And that is, the reason I don't mention a lot of these people's names is because they already have numbers they don't deserve. And that's not because I'm jealous or envious. It's because they spew nonsense, they spew garbage, they spew misinformation without references. I don't mind a good debate. I don't mind critique if it's backed up with the same academic references that I use. But at the same time, as soon as I mention them and you all go to check them out, that increases his numbers. And Google algorithms and Facebook algorithms that track this stuff, they send out these people's things to more and more people. That's how people build an audience online. Unfortunately, a lot of people will deliberately say provocative things just to build a following so that they can sell useless things like supplements or whatever. So it's very important that we kind of try to diminish that, while at the same time exposing idiots for being idiots, because there's too much proliferation of idiots in social media, and we should give credit where it's due to people like, T. Colin Campbell and a lot of the other people who are out there who are making headway, and I will try to do my part as well. So that's it for me, folks. Hopefully, you'll hit your share buttons and your emoticons. Hopefully, you enjoyed this and it made sense to you. Sorry about cutting everybody off at the beginning. I just got a note from my software that I tried to just get off the page because I couldn't see you guys, and then it accidentally bumped me off. So anyway, we will get to something else next week, hopefully equally as intriguing. You can always send me your ideas as well for shows, and I'll be happy to address them if I feel they're relevant. And don't forget, as I did a few days ago, my food freedom course, and the first module is free, as Perry's reminding us. There's a link right there. So foodfreedomcourse.com/free. That whole first module is absolutely free. That's how much I believe in the product, because I think once people invest in that free module, they will want to see what the rest of the course is about. And that took me years to put together as well. So again, that's it. And hopefully, let's get nuts. Hopefully that worked for all you guys. Let's get nuts, and why calorie counting and macro tracking is so qualitatively limited in helping to get you where you think it is you want to go. So let's keep that in mind. Let's spread that word, and let's hit your share buttons on this. And hopefully that's all good. And I will see you all next week.